A high-pitched klaxon sounded through the cold emptiness of space. Warning: organic war vessel sighted in Liver sector. Prepare for instant contact. The alien admirals grinned at first, then fear quickly took the place of arrogance. Every sensor ping blared that this was not your average Terran vessel. The Tavaran Dominion ruled over the galaxy unopposed for over 500 years. Its dominion stretched beyond 1,000 worlds, all connected to the Dominion's capital by a formidable fleet and technology no enemy might dare to oppose. Its star-flung empire was a product of carefully planned campaigns, undertaken by admirals who prided themselves on their discipline, guile, and overwhelming force. Long since had most star nations bowed in vassalage, paying tribute to avoid destruction. In Dominion's records, humanity was perhaps worth a footnote. First contact with Earth centuries ago revealed an innovative but fractious species, one too fractured to unite to stand against an interstellar empire or possess advanced enough warp technology. As time passed, sparsely populated human colonies sprung up in frontier areas, but these were pale reflections of the Dominion's dominion. At best, the Tavaran regarded humans with mild curiosity, like interesting upstarts too underdeveloped to pose a threat of serious retribution. But over the decades, tensions mounted. Some corners of the galaxy speculated that Terran borders held quiet outposts that accumulated experimental sciences. Occasionally, skirmishes broke out when Dominion captains pushed too far into human worlds. Each time, the Dominion easily smashed the small pockets of human resistance. Believing themselves invincible, they had no way of knowing that these isolated defeats inspired humanity to innovate at an even higher rate. But after the Jinzer incident, the Dominion's approach changed, a seemingly trifling engagement in which a single Terran frigate managed to cripple 2 Dominion cruisers through unorthodox tactics. Alarmed by the surprise result, Dominion intelligence investigated the level of Terran militarization. Yet official advisors dismissed such talk of a real threat. Humanity may have advanced, they said, but was still no match for the empire that had wiped out entire species for far less. That outlook remained, until an enigmatic network of human cells embedded in the human systems appeared to be forging alliances in resource-rich star systems within the Dominion's frontier. When the Dominion took action to crush the rebellion, they found human fortifications far more advanced than any intelligence had indicated. The Tavaran High Command finally woke up. The mightiest empire in known space had to ask itself a question that would have been unthinkable just a generation before. Had humanity evolved from a mere footnote to a legitimate challenger? As such questions loomed over the Dominion's strategic summits, one new crisis erupted. Dozens of lesser frontier systems descended into chaos as local despots took advantage of the Dominion's distraction with humans. Supply lines faltered. The Dominion admirals, previously at ease, were balancing multiple brush fires. The bureaucracy called for immediate, drastic action. And no place better captured this shifting tide than Liver V, a planet at the edge of contested space. This world had long been an agricultural backwater, tribute to the distant capital of the Dominion. But there were rumors of a hidden Terran presence, possibly a secret listening post or experimental facility. With time, to ensure total control, the Dominion established a permanent fleet outpost in orbit. Such a plan may have even worked, were it not for the Dominion experiencing a strange spike in warp signatures just outside Liver's neighboring systems. They had the intelligence that an unidentified warship, human-made, was active in the area. There were no verifiable data on its size or capabilities, and the Dominion was concerned. As the confident Admiral Rillan's Tavaran 14th Fleet closed in on Liver V in reinforcements of the local garrison, disaster struck. A Dominion probe out in the outer system registered an inbound warp signature, and it was Terran. The readings were inconsistent, as if the vessel employed advanced cloaking or had some kind of exotic power core. Then, parting remained the only option. They had to leave. Intelligence report indicates human warship. Brace for impact. Despite the foreboding warning, Rillan was doubtful. She commanded an armada of dreadnoughts, carriers, and support craft, each bristling with plasma weaponry of advanced design. One Terran vessel, no matter how renovated, would stand as well as the old Terrans against a full Dominion fleet. At least, That was the operative assumption, and one held by her staff. In the Dominion's view, what made humans clever was also their shortcoming, because they were eventually outgunned. All the way on the other end of the stalemate, hidden behind Liver's padding of thick asteroid belts, the Terran dreadnought Icarus Rising performed final preparations. Captain Elias Brandt, the commanding officer, a grizzled veteran from the Defense Forces of Earth, examined the sensor readouts with steely resolve. The Icarus Rising was the result of decades of secret research. Its hull meshed with alien alloys, and the propulsion attached a fusion of quantum warp theories with next-gen thrusters for unprecedented agility. Its armament included weapons said to cut through Dominion capital ships. This was humanity's play, one kick-ass warship that could hit far above its canonical weight. Brandt's crew was a mixed crowd of engineers, scientists, and pilots who escaped from Dominion expansion. They had trained for hours in a spare simulator, studying Dominion tactics and weaknesses. While confident in their advanced hardware, however, they also knew all too well the risk. No sane strategy had called for facing a powerful Tavaran fleet alone. But Earth's leaders, in their desperation, had greenlit the mission to hit the Dominion at a key moment, to take advantage of the confusion, and to demonstrate that the human race was no longer a people that could be ignored. The Dominion's presence was everywhere around them. Hundreds of cruisers surrounded Liver V at various orbits, protecting station docks and orbital platforms. Admiral Rillen's flagship, the Brilliant Axiom, sat just above the planet's north pole, directing the entire operation. The conventional wisdom was that no one warship, even one that was rumored to be advanced, would be able to get through such defenses. Any assault by the humans would be met with swift annihilation. But a feeling of dread coursed through the Tavaran lines. The simultaneous subspace babble of "prepare for the worst" didn't feel like Terran bravado alone. There lay the fearful possibility that the humans had indeed constructed a capital vessel comparable to the Dominion's finest. And if so, the entire power structure could change. Thus, the stage was set. The Tavaran Dominion was an ancient cosmic juggernaut, and it loomed around Liver V, ready to swat down any Terran incursion. In the shadows, the Icarus Rising prepared for the war that may be humanity's last stand. If they didn't, it would only confirm the Dominion's unshakable dominion. If they did succeed, though, the galaxy might never see humans the same way again. The bridge of the Brilliant Axiom fell silent as Admiral Rillen absorbed the barrage of urgent comms from her subcommanders. Sensor returns showed a lone Terran warship entering from the system's outer rim, although its signature flickered erratically, a probable indicator of advanced stealth or jamming. Rillen's eyes narrowed. All the tech they had, everything he'd seen in and around the target, was unsettling. "All ships remain on high alert," she called, voice resonating around the ship. Officers in stark uniforms rushed between stations. "I want constant readings from every sensor array. If the humans are probing our perimeter, let them see how strong it is." Over the Dominion lines, a ring of interceptors flew into patrol patterns, scanning for the intruder. Gun batteries along Liver V's equator woke up their orbital platforms. The peaceful pace of life managing a crammed planet turned, in the twinkling of an eye, into a potential war zone. Captain Elias Brandt stared at green letters and numbers as they whirled past on a holographic screen in the Icarus Rising's command center, the ship's AI sifting through comm frequencies in the area. He took a measured breath. Time to get them out of their comfort zone. "Helm, initiate partial cloak and plot our infiltration course." The partial cloak, a hodgepodge of alien tech, didn't make the dreadnought truly invisible, but scrambled many types of detection. In concert with deceptive warp signals, it might scramble an enemy's target lock. The Icarus Rising delved deeper into the system, hugging the outer rim of an asteroid belt. Its reactors throbbed in controlled bursts, minimizing heat and matter emissions that might reveal its location. But the Dominion sensor network was still formidable. Before long, a covey of corvettes swung in interception vectors, their captains eager to probe the Terran presence. These agile craft had excellent maneuverability and razor plasma guns. In ordinary times, they would flush out or back into a corner smaller enemies. But the Icarus Rising was anything but typical. Brandt let the corvettes get close, keeping up the pretense of a weaker or smaller vessel. Then he gave the order. "Weapons free." engaged the lead corvette with a single rail lance volley. A muted thud echoed through the hull of the Terran dreadnought as a hyperrackle projectile was expelled by an internal rail lance. The slug traveled through the vacuum so fast that the corvette's shields hardly acknowledged contact before breaking apart. With a shower of sparks, the corvette listed, venting atmosphere. Its escort corvettes sagged in shock, their thrusters slamming to reverse, unsure how to respond to a single shot so deadly. Admiral Rillen saw the sudden blink on her tactical map from her position on the brilliant axiom. Took out one corvette with minimum effort. That graphics showed sharp energy spikes indicative of high-grade coil or railgun systems. Rillen's jaw tightened. She opened the fleet-wide channel. All formations converge on Vector 3A. Not a standard human vessel. Stay in tight communication. But the feeling of foreboding increased. At scattered viewpoints, Dominion frigates glimpsed a large, dark-hulled warship weaving amidst the asteroids. The Icarus rising powered to the side just enough to put in short bursts of rail lance and missile pods that killed unsuspecting corvettes. Small Dominion ships fell one by one. Every murder added even more confusion in the ranks. Rillen's communication officer, Lieutenant Zirin, did his best to keep the peace. Admiral, engagement reports are ubiquitous throughout the sector. The humans have been using that asteroid belt for cover. Our corvettes can't track them down. They're calling for heavy cruiser support. Rillen scowled. Dispatch the cruisers, but I want them in a net formation. We'll take the Terran ship into a kill zone. The cruisers of the Dominion obeyed, approaching from multiple vectors to create a cross-field of fire on the outer terminus of the asteroid belt. Their thick shell and devastating plasma cannons had bested countless foes. In theory, it was an impenetrable web that no single warship could penetrate. And yet the humans moved like they'd been studying Dominion tactics for generations. The Icarus Rising simulated a dead-on pass into the cruiser's corridor with practiced precision. Dominion sensors were locked and a hail of plasma bolts scorched the way ahead. Then, just before those beams would have hit, the Terran dreadnought executed a turn that should have been impossible for a ship of that mass, firing its boosters and vector thrusters at once to yaw the vessel 90 degrees across the plane of the belt. Massive rocks gave them partial cover. The fire arcs of the net formation overlapped, but they had also lost their target to swirls of debris. The cruisers scrambled to reacquire, swinging turrets and slewing scanners. That brief moment of hesitation was all it took. Desperate to keep the Dominion on the back foot, Captain Brandt ordered the Icarus Rising to launch a barrage of Shard missiles, experimental warheads that burst apart during flight, unleashing microkinetic projectiles. A storm of fast-moving shards pelted a pair of cruisers, making holes in their shields. One cruiser's reactor containment was compromised, resulting in an internal explosion powerful enough to illuminate the entire sector in a flash of orange glare. From the perspective of every Dominion bridge, the implication was grim. This was not some carry-on infiltration or bedraggled Terran frigate. The Icarus Rising paired enhanced weaponry with canny maneuvering, and just enough shield or cloak trickery to outsmart the Dominion's finest. Confidence wavered. As she watched more cruisers flounder, Admiral Rillen called an emergency war council with her sub-admirals. It was a question, unthinkable an hour prior, that now hung in the air. Could they be outmatched by a single Terran ship? That was not something the sub-admirals are willing to accept. Admiral Harris, at the head of the 4th Battle Squadron, called for a straight battle. We'll bait them between our dreadnoughts, me and our orbital defense platforms. They cannot hide in those asteroids forever. Rillen agreed upon a plan. Move the heavier warships into a wide pincer, using the planet's strong gravitational well to cut off any attempt at warp escape. Then the heavy beam turrets of the orbital platforms around Liver V would saturate the region with fire. Theoretically, no adversary, no matter how stealthy, could survive that crossfire. And so the Dominion's dreadnought Planet Breaker, along with 2 sister ships, pressed ahead, filling the space between the orbit of the planet and the belt. They came to dwarf smaller cruisers with their gargantuan forms. If the Terrans dared to fight these monsters, Rillen thought, they would simply be wiped from existence. Captain Brandt knew it was a threat. The scanners of the Icarus Rising presented a trio of monstrous capital ships, their shield grids denser than the stars. Anyone could wipe out a small fleet all on its own. The advanced rail lances may not be able to one-shot through their multiple layers of defenses either. He summoned his senior officers for a tactical huddle. The blinking red icons of the dreadnoughts closed in on a holomap. These capital ships will trap us if we don't move, he said. But they also provide a big, slow target. We can't engage them frontally, so we'll use surprise. We come in, strike quickly, then disappear again. The ship's weapons specialist, Lieutenant Harlow, frowned. Even if we pull maneuvers, they possess orbital platforms that can saturate the entire approach. We're going to wind up being double-pegged. Brant nodded. We'll have them shoot each other, or at least compel them to hold their fire. Now if we make sure the dreadnought line is between us and the planet, the orbital platforms won't run any risk of friendly fire. Let's exploit that. The plan relied on precise flying. The Icarus Rising maneuvered through a maze of drifting asteroids, edging closer to the gravitational sphere of Liver V. The dreadnoughts also launched Dominion interceptors to interfere with the Terran approach. Despite their persistence, their computer targeting fell prey to the same cloaking disruptions as before that had stymied earlier attempts. One after another, the interceptors were pounded by well-aimed rail lance bursts or maneuvered into submission until they had to break off to refuel. As the Terran dreadnought broke far enough from the belt, it shot directly over the planet's north pole and ensured its alignment with the orbital platforms that had their own vantage point. The Dominion capital ships, large though they were, belatedly understood their silhouettes blind to the Icarus rising from the station's lines of fire. If the platforms fired off a barrage now, they would risk striking their own dreadnoughts. Rillin choked her hands, watching the stalemate. Hold the orbital platforms. Casualties on our side, friendly casualties, are too costly. Dreadnoughts, close to short range, and saturate them in plasma. Her orders sent the Planet Breaker and her sister ships galloping forward together, banks of turret cannons flaring. The shields of the Icarus Rising shuddered beneath the barrage. The Dominion dreadnoughts were no laughing matter. Purple and green plasma streams hammered the Terran vessel. Alarms would blare internally, indicating critical drain of shields. Captain Brant shifted as the deck rumbled from near misses. Sparks erupted from one or two more overloaded consoles. But the humans wouldn't give ground. With a bold surge forward, the Icarus Rising swept even closer to the bulbous bow of the Planet Breaker. By normal logic, no smaller vessel would dare to enter a dreadnought's prime arcs of fire, but the Terran pilot had an advanced inertial dampener and had used it to slide in at an angle which minimized the time the dreadnought would have to keep a target lock. Turrets on the dreadnought pivoted, failing to track the Terran craft at range. Now, Brant barked. The Icarus Rising's primary rail lance pulsed with pent-up energy. The coil system launched a tungsten slug at ludicrous speed, striking a known weak point just above the Planet Breaker's forward shield projector. The slug impacted with devastating effect, penetrating the dreadnought's multi-layered shielding and embedding into the hull. Secondary explosions roiled down the side of the bow, compelling the Planet Breaker to swing forward in anguish. The second Dominion dreadnought turned to assist, and a torrent of plasma from its weaponry pinioned the Icarus Rising behind the bulk of Planet Breaker. For a split second there was confusion as the Dominion capital ships tried to set up a crossfire. Icarus Rising opted to use the drifting Planet Breaker as a shield, forcing the second dreadnought to hold fire or risk hitting its ally. As the mayhem unfolded, Admiral Rillin shouted confusion of her own. Close formation. Lock them down. But the dreadnoughts, for as huge as they were, didn't have the precision to close in the Terran warship without risking each other. The orbital platforms, meanwhile, were kept on hold, unable to get a clean angle. Rillin watched from the vantage of the brilliant Axiom, in horror, as a single ship rendered her carefully prepared blockade a joke. Then came the final blow-in. This phase of the conflict, the Icarus Rising loaded a second shot into its rail lance. The damaged Planet Breaker tried to spin around and replenish its own cannons, though, with its forward projectors severely compromised. The Terran slug punched into the belly of the dreadnought, triggering a chain reaction through its power conduits. The Planet Breaker's midsection vented flame and debris in a brilliant explosion. Alarms sounded throughout Dominion channels. With damage that appeared beyond repair, the once proud warship listed, essentially out of the fight. Silence hung over the region as the damaged Terran dreadnought pulled away from the burning wreck. The two other Dominion dreadnoughts were slow to follow. Their captains, rattled by the destruction of their sister ship, flipped between pressing the attack and retreating to safer waters. From the perspective of 1,000 Dominion officers scattered across the system, the scene was unimaginable. They had assumed the message, human warship detected, prepare for the worst, was an exaggeration. Now they realized the worst was true. Anxiety buzzed through formations that had only considered Terrans as a postscript. But, on the Terran side, bruised but operational, the Icarus Rising ascended, showing that guile and advanced engineering could compensate for the Dominion's superiority in numbers and tech. Nobody in the Dominion lines could dispute it. The conflict had just gone over. Disbelief and panic threatened to unspool decades of arrogance. The stage was primed for one last battle that might determine the fate of the Liver sector, if not the entire Dominion. A sickly cloud of overcooked plasma hung into the void over Liver V as the Icarus Rising met the last of the Dominion dreadnoughts. Stationary orbital platforms continued to trail the Terran ship, but were afraid to fire for fear of hitting their own capital vessels. Frantic chatter over open comm channels among Dominion cruisers called for orders, debated retreat, and tried to re-establish formation. In the span of a few minutes, Admiral Rilland's carefully orchestrated blockade had fallen into what was, more or less, near chaos. The Admiral scowled at their main viewport on the brilliant Axiom. The little icon for the planet breaker was faded and worn, like it had been metaphorically kicked around and beaten up for bruises, and had found itself in a state of catastrophic damage. She had never imagined a single Terran vessel could inflict such damage. Her sub-admirals peppered her with questions. Should we pull back and regroup? Is the Terran ship invincible? We're out of position. Do we bind back along orbital ring? Rilland stifled her own reservations. All dreadnoughts and carriers bear in on the Terran warship. She declared over the encrypted comm, frigates and cruisers, line the outer perimeter, blockade any exit. This ends now. Her directive faced resistance in practice. Meanwhile, the second dreadnought was still reeling from the near collision with the planet breaker, its crew scrambling to realign its shield arrays. The third dreadnought pressed on more aggressively, seeking to draw the Terran's attention. Dominion carriers clustered together and sent off squadrons of fighter wings. Smaller ships, meanwhile, attempted to bracket the Icarus Rising from behind. If they could hold it in place long enough, the dreadnought or the orbital platforms would have a chance at landing a fatal shot. With the swarm of new threat vectors in view, Captain Elias Brandt steadied himself for the final push. We can't be at war in every direction, he said, studying sensor data. We have to disable or neutralize their flagship in order to interrupt command. That might lead the rest to back down. Lieutenant Harlow was in my head, voice crackling over the internal comm. We can muster enough power for a final volley with the main rail lance, but we're nearing critical temperatures. Too much screw it up, we can have meltdown. Brandt set his jaw. We'll do it. Where's Admiral Rilland's command ship? Sensor overlays marked the brilliant Axiom on high orbit above the planet, holding an entire flank. The ship itself bristled with heavy plasma cannons, even more than your run-of-the-mill Dominion capital craft. Given the swarms of carriers and frigates in the area, a direct way was a suicidal one. But if they hoped to give the Dominion a reason to back off, they had to hit the top. Helm, Brandt ordered calmly. Plot a course that places us below the planet's horizon as seen from the Axiom's location. We'll use Liver to slingshot around. Engage thrusters at full. The Icarus Rising banked hard, slipping under the forward arcs of the second dreadnought. A concert of plasma beams licked across the Terran shields, shaking the entire ship. The pilot ground his teeth and banked the thruster power to hold the chosen trajectory. At the last minute, they flew a few meters above the dreadnought's hull. Dominion gunner cursed as the vessel sailed away. Captain Brandt's strategy was to slide in on the underside of the orbital plane of the brilliant Axiom, using the world's curvature for partial cover. The Axiom's view would be blocked, and Rilland would have to either move or guess the Terran approach angle. The swirl of fighter wings tried to intercept, but the Icarus Rising's high-tech jamming suite reconfigured their approach data. Panicked airmen crashed into each other or shot blindly at figments. The mixed Terran craft flew free, leaving confusion in its wake. On the Admiral's command deck, Rillen lost her patience. "They're dropping below our firing arcs. Drop the Axiom into a lower orbit now. We can't allow them to close in." She turned to one of the officers manning the orbital platform network. "Shoot, and shoot, and shoot. As soon as you have a clean shot, shoot, no matter what the risk." The tension was palpable. The now sovereign Dominion had been put on its back foot, scrambling for ways to prevent a single warship from embarrassing the whole blockade. As the Axiom entered a lower orbit, its thrusters glowing, the Icarus Rising broke from the planet's terminator line. The tactical map showed the Terran dreadnought streaking upward, like a predator from the dark. Orbital platforms threw off desperate volleys of beam fire, but the angles were all wrong, the timing off. The Terran craft spiraled, each volley passing by only kilometers away. Now the Terrans had arrived at the ultimate threat, the brilliant Axiom itself. In addition to the flagship's powerful shielding, multiple layers of cutting-edge armor, and a fearsome plasma lance capable of vaporizing smaller ships with a single shot. That lance hummed ominously as Admiral Rillen prepped it. But if the Terrans got close enough, they could be torn asunder. But Captain Brandt had a scheme. He recognized that the Axiom's primary weapon had a small target window and needed a steady firing solution. "Helm, spiral approach," he commanded. "Continue to change velocity to defeat their targeting. Weapons, keep the lance rail until we have a sure angle." The swirling dance began. The Axiom was on the move, its rotund hull turning as the Terran dreadnought spun in place around it. Turret batteries spat plasma in all directions. Some hammered on the Icarus Rising's shields, rattling the deck. The Terran engineering team desperately redirected power from life support backups to maintain the shield matrix stability. The Icarus Rising launched intercept missiles that had the Axiom angle its primary lance outside toward the ship in order to protect itself. The Terran dreadnought crept closer through this storm of fire. Then, without warning, the Icarus Rising heaved, raking the hull of the Dante Mercatus with a blanket of short-range EM missiles. Those warheads detonated near the Axiom's perimeter, destabilizing some of its shielding harmonics. Admiral Rillen's ship shuddered from the sudden strike, energy levels erratic. "That's our opening," Brandt roared. "Main rail lance, lock onto the Axiom's reactor segment. Fire at will." Ignoring the red temperature warnings, Lieutenant Harlow engaged the coil lance one last time. The slug ripped through space, moving so quickly that viewers would have seen only a blur. The blow to the Axiom's midsection was catastrophic. Despite their advanced shields, the partial HPP collapse from the shock missiles kept a blinking vulnerability. A chain reaction of explosions lit up the interior corridors of the battleship, cracking the hull in numerous areas. Observers throughout the sector watched in stunned disbelief as the Dominion's flagship was, in effect, gutted from within. On the Axiom, Admiral Rillen's command deck descended into chaos. Consoles went boom, smoke poured from vents. Crew raced to close off compartments. But the damage to the structure was too severe. Lifelines of energy power lines ruptured, feeding internal fires. Dazed by the jarring blasts, Rillen herself felt the battle lost. The once celebrated flagship was quickly drifting, battered, beyond repair for the foreseeable future. The whole Dominion force fell instantly silent. The flagship that could not be stopped, the largest embodiment of Tavaran power in the Liver sector, lay as a flaming hulk. The sub-admirals, with no leadership and confronted with a Terran warship that had just smacked their heads in, made a snap judgment. The Dominion lines began to withdraw, ship by ship. Carriers pulled their fighters back. Cruisers withdrew from orbit. Even the remaining dreadnoughts, while still operational, fell back to safer distances. The chain of command was broken to such an extent that no cohesive counterattack emerged. It was a moment no one in the galaxy had ever seen coming. The Dominion, with its illustrious pedigree of absolute victory, turning tail in chaos from a single Terran vessel. On comm channels, Dominion captains debated whether to surrender or regroup in another system. When it became clear it was going to go very poorly very fast, survival instincts took over. They went to FTL wherever they could, and all they left behind was a few crippled ships that just continued to float. In the void above Liver V, the orbital platforms sat in silence. There was no longer any covering fire from the main fleet, and many of their control links had been severed. With the Dominion fleet in disarray, these stations could hold their position, but they were still vulnerable to Terran sabotage. Some of the station crews jumped ship, hoping the humans would spare them and taking escape pods away to the planet. The battlefield became a graveyard of shattered metal and flickering trails of displaced energy. Debris from wrecked cruisers, corvettes, and sections of dreadnoughts drifted as silent monuments to the Dominion's hubris. The Icarus Rising emerged from the debris field, hull blackened, shields sputtering. The scarred Terran warship had survived, decisively proving that humanity's technological advances and unorthodox tactics could defeat the greatest military strength the galaxy had ever known. Crew throughout the Terran dreadnought's bridge whooped with exhausted relief. Captain Brandt slumped into his command chair, relief washing over his face. They had survived the unthinkable, facing down an entire Dominion blockade around a fortified planet, and winning. Status report, Brandt said after a pause. Engineers listed a laundry list of urgent repairs that are necessary. The primary rail lance was offline, a meltdown hazard, shielding generators at minimal output, warp drive operating. If only at reduced output. But the skeleton of the ship still stood, testament to Terran ingenuity. Outside, the charred hull of the brilliant Axiom hovered in place, fire licking up and down the ruptured superstructure. An ever-fading testament of Tavern's supremacy sputtered with failing energy. In the last comm exchange, Admiral Rillen's voice faded in with lacerating force. You, Terrans, this changes nothing. Static drowned out the remainder. No one lost sight of the importance of that fickle, now broken, final vow. Back on the surface of the planet, from the largest settlement to the smallest patch of farmland, a wave of surprise swept across the planet. The Dominion was on the verge of solidifying unquestionable dominance over Liver V, and within one engagement, the Terran warship had reduced them to a retreat. For many local inhabitants, human sympathizers and other subject species, it was as if a new day had broken. The effect on the rest of the Dominion's territory would be immediate and profound. Centuries of guaranteed dominance buckled in a single clash. For the first time, lesser races across the galaxy dared a hope. With humans crushing the Dominion's blockade, maybe no empire is beyond reach. And so in that final, decisive engagement over Liver V, the unstoppable juggernaut that was the Tavern Dominion found itself repulsed. Amid the wreckage battered in the room, the Icarus Rising shone a beacon proving that prepare for the worst was no idle warning. But the worst had come for the Dominion, and they were hopelessly unprepared to combat what humanity had turned into. The following weeks after the Liver V encounter sent shockwaves through the galaxy. News of it spread like wildfire. A single Terran warship, reportedly a ship with a fusion of stolen technologies and radical human engineering, had scattered a major Dominion fleet, leaving 2 dreadnoughts crippled and the flagship to turn tail in pieces. Skeptics wanted evidence. Then the subspace recordings arrived, along with the accounts of refugees who had witnessed the powerful Tavern blockade being obliterated. Inside the Dominion's central operation, outrage and fear simmered. Emperor Vorith, who had long placed faith in the indomitable strength of his navy, vented at senior admirals and intelligence officers. He pressed for an explanation. How and why had humans progressed so far, so fast? A wave of purges passed through the Dominion's officer corps as scapegoats were needed for the disaster at Liver. Admirals who once bragged of easy expansions found themselves picked over, or worse. And over at Liver V, cautious optimism reigned. Shielded from Dominion scrutiny, local officers met with Captain Elias Brandt and his command staff. Orbital platforms lay battered and were later secured by the Terrans, practical still and offering safe diplomatic sessions. Although the Icarus Rising itself had taken severe damage and would need to be extensively repaired, she'd done the impossible, inflicted a crippling blow against the Dominion in a single, high-stakes engagement. Celebrations erupted across human space. Colonies that had been terrified of the inexorable Dominion fleets now had new cause for hope. Decades of muted dread were replaced by an eagerness for a future of Terran purpose instead of alien subjugation. Political factions on Earth's council issued official commendations to Captain Brant and his crew, declaring that their mission's success would alter the balance of power forever. Other species, previously consigned to Dominion vassalage, took notice. Some discreetly contacted Terran diplomats, offering to ally against the Dominion. If the humans could maintain the offensive momentum, or at least stall the Dominion, a galaxy-spanning coalition might emerge. Whispers of imminent uprisings rose in backwater systems, each emboldened by the certainty that the Dominion could be bled, and bled badly. As for battered Icarus Rising, it hung above Liver V in a synchronous orbit. Engineering teams worked around the clock to repair major power couplings and patch innumerable hull breaches. The forward rail lance was in an advanced state of needing a refit. The last shot had fried all but half the coil elements. Shield emitters stuttered with spotty coverage. But none of those hardships dulled the sense of triumph reverberating through the hallways. In the mess hall, crew members recounted the maneuvers that had kept them alive, the close brushes with plasma death. Lieutenant Harlow, arms wrapped in bandages from a console detonation, became an unlikely hero figure in the following days, telling wide-eyed recruits how she'd been juggling meltdown prevention with ensuring that last rail lance shot got fired. Captain Brant, who was normally reserved, had allowed the rare moments of levity. They had done the impossible, he said. When the official broadcast of the Terran High Command finally arrived in orbit around Liver, it brought news that victory had changed Earth's strategic position. Having started as purely defensive, Terran policy may shift to restricted offensives, with a goal of driving the Dominion back from the frontiers of humanity's worlds once and for all. The battle above Liver was not the end of conflict, but rather the dawn of a new age, one in which humans would no longer cower, would no longer beg for mercy, would no longer bargain from a position of weakness. At the same time, the Dominion's capacity to retaliate with vengeance remained a chilling prospect. Emperor Vorith had ordered a new plan for warfare forged, the resurrection of the authoritative Dreadnought expansion, the targeted hunting of Icarus Rising sister projects, if any did exist. Sectors nearer the Dominion's center prepared for an influx of militaristic zeal, since humiliation often pushed oppressive regimes to double down on force. Throughout starports and shipping lanes, neutrals and allies alike debated the implications. Some foresaw a full-scale war that would pull in the Orion arm. Others predicted that the Dominion, when its veneer was challenged, would fall apart from within. For the Terrans themselves, the way scrawled out less certainty, but a fierce drive. They had shown, for the entire galaxy to witness, that they were not insignificant monkeys or primitive savages, as some alien invective had described them. They were a people who, when backed against a wall, could unleash creativity in the face of mortal danger. The last image transmitted by Liver V was of the flaming hulk of the Terran dreadnought, hovering off the frame of the bones of the Dominion flagship. It became an image that echoed in every news feed, a monument to unassailable arrogance brought low by audacity and valor. The signal was unmistakable. Not even the Dominion should be able to sleep easy when the bow of a human warship comes churning toward their doorstep, and with this in mind, no empire was safe. A galaxy had shifted in a day of violence and audacity. And so the man wearing those scars stood atop the half-repaired command deck, gazing at the planet below, and knew what their victory meant. And the Terrans weren't going to go back to anonymity. Their name would ring through the halls of power. For the Dominion, the message had been sent. Human warship detected. Brace for the worst. They had trained, and still, it wasn't enough. Now, as new alliances blossomed and the Dominion staggered from a demoralizing defeat, humanity's star was on the rise. The next era of cosmic history was about to start. The whole galaxy rallied to see what humanity could do next.